think it's honestly kind of this might seem like a weird word choice, but hear me out. I think it's really empowering because, like I'm sure many of your listeners, I care a lot about nature and wild things, and I feel overwhelmed sometimes thinking about like the big environmental problems. I worry about climate change and biodiversity loss and habitat destruction, and it can all feel like really dark and really daunting, and like, what can I do about it? But then it's like, oh, here's one very simple, very actionable thing you can do.
In today's episode of the Backyard Ecology podcast, we welcome Ashley Kennedy back to the show. Ashley is an entomologist who recently published her research on what eastern bluebird nestlings eat. In the last episode of the podcast, Ashley and I discussed the results of that research. And today we're going to talk about some of the ways that you can apply her research to your own yard and community. Welcome to the Backyard Ecology podcast. Hey, Ashley, welcome back to the Backyard Ecology podcast.
I'm excited to be here. Thanks again.
Oh, yes. And so in the last episode, we were talking about your research into the diets of the eastern bluebirds. And I'll have a link in the description for anyone who wants to go back and listen to that conversation and hear about how this research was done and some of those findings and such. And as someone who's just a nature nerd, always has been, always loved learning about nature and everything, just finding out this information, it's just fun and interesting in and of itself. But what I find even more fun and interesting is that we can take what you learned from that research and directly apply it to things that we can do as individual homeowners or people who are working and volunteering at different public lands around where there are bluebird trails and stuff. So there are direct applications to this, which is always fun and interesting too. Before we dive into that, can you tell us a little bit about why you even got interested in studying um, what nestling bluebirds eat?
Sure. And I've had people ask me, like, are you an ornithologist? Are you an entomologist? Are you like a well-rounded naturalist who knows a little bit about everything? And I'm definitely, I would say, an entomologist who accidentally wound up working on birds. And I was not, a bird nerd from the beginning. Um, but I want to take you back to February 2014. At that point in time, I had a master's degree in entomology from the University of Delaware, and they have kind of a cool department where it's the only one I know of that it's called the Department of Entomology and Wildlife Ecology. So it kind of puts together these two things that most people wouldn't lump together like that. So my master's degree wasn't an ecology project. I was doing taxonomy. I got to describe some new species, which was a lot of fun. But I had taken a couple classes with Doug Tallamy, and I had like a pretty good like coursework background in ecology. So in 2014, I was living in Northern Virginia, and one day I got this flyer in my mailbox, and it said that my property, along with many others in the area, was going to be um, sprayed with a pesticide in April by helicopter. And it was to control a pest species called the fall cankerworm. And I'd taken graduate level courses in entomology by this point, and I was like, fall cankerworm, like that's not one of like the big pests that I, was familiar with. And I at that time, like there was a lot of buzz about brown marmorated stink bug was still somewhat new, invasive, and when we learned about like spongy moth or what used to be called gypsy moth, and we learned about like a lot of other big pests for the region. But I looked up the fall cankerworm and I was like, oh, it's just, it's a little green inchworm. Like that's no big deal. Like that's not a big pest. But I didn't know because that wasn't my specialty. So I thought, if the county is going to spray it, they probably have a good reason. But let me just ask some other entomologists that I know, because it just so happened that the next month, so in March, I was going to be going to a regional meeting of the Entomological Society of America. So there'd be a whole bunch of insect experts under one roof, and I could, pick their brains. And so at this meeting, like I went up to one person after another and just kind of mentioned, like, oh, by the way, my county is spraying for fall cankerworm next month. And over and over again, I had people kind of scratching their heads and saying, like, really? Like fall cankerworm? Like that's not even an invasive species. Like that's a native species. What's the big deal? And so I was starting to, second guess the judgment of the county. And I decided to shoot an email to Doug Talmy because I knew like he already by then had a distinguished career in entomology and ecology, and I just wanted to bounce it off of him. And the timing worked out like really funny. Like I'm paraphrasing, but he basically said like, it's so funny that you brought up fall cankerworm because I have a graduate student who's studying Carolina chickadees in the DC area, and her name is Desiree Narango. She's brilliant. I hope you get to have her on the show sometime. Just really phenomenal ecologist. And she had happened to find out that these inchworms are really important in the diet of Carolina chickadees. And he said, if they're spraying in April, they're going to kill, not just all of these inchworms, but they're going to kill all the Lepidoptera that are feeding at that. And, there's thousands of species that are active at that time. And combine that with that's when you've got the spring migrations starting, and, the birds are going to be coming through and need those caterpillars. So his email was what really, um, you know, pushed me to thinking like, all right, I've got to do something. I want to, see if there's a way I can get the county to reconsider this. And I was fairly easily able to opt my property out. I just had to, submit a form saying I didn't want to do it. But I wanted other people to do the same thing. So I wrote just like an op-ed for the local paper, and it got a lot of attention. And my inbox was blown up with people who wanted to help. And I was coming at it from the angle of, I'm an entomologist. I want to save these insects. But the people who reached out to me, by and large, were bird lovers. And so what really got their attention was like, what? Like, the spring migration, the birds are going to go hungry. Like, we've got to do something about this. Um, so, there were bird clubs and like local chapter of the Audubon Society, and friends groups from local parks. All these groups kind of banded together. We had this, what I called this, you know, Fall Cankerworm Coalition, just very informal. Um, but we were, trying to get the county to reconsider it, because, and I should also say, like, I work in public health entomology, so I'm not like a hippie who's anti-pesticide. Like, I believe in, I believe there's many times when their use is warranted and justified and important, and can save human lives for sure. But I just feel like it's also important to save them for when we really do need them, and not just be using them whenever we see a bug feeding on a tree. And while I was working on this Fall Cankerworm Coalition, I continued corresponding with Doug Talamy over email, like kind of asking questions, and he was giving me information like, a single pair of chickadees, if they're going to successfully rear like one clutch of 4 chicks, to fledging, they're going to need between 6,000 and 9,000 caterpillars. So, numbers like that were just, mind-boggling, and I used them, and I spoke to the county like uh, board of supervisors at a budget hearing to say, like maybe this money for this pesticide spraying could be used, better used elsewhere, um, and there were a couple other events like that. So, and I was corresponding with Doug so much, and I realized like this is so interesting, and I feel like I'm barely scratching the surface of like bird, insect, food webs, and it's all like just so interesting. I was like, I'd really like to keep working on this, and so he said, I'll come back to Delaware, and we'll come up with a project for you. So that was how it all began. And as far as the county where I was living in Virginia, it wasn't a resounding success from the fall cankerworm's perspective. Like I see that it's still listed on their website as a pest species. I don't think they've really discontinued the spraying, but I think we did help to at least, we made more people aware of what was going on, and so more properties chose to opt out. So hopefully, it was reduced acreage and reduced volume of spraying, and hopefully that meant, fewer birds went hungry. And I know they don't do the spraying every year. Um, they do it when they catch a certain number of moths in the fall, and then they're predicting that it's going to be like an outbreak year in the spring. Um, but what kind of rubbed me the wrong way is the county would sometimes frame it as like a trees versus caterpillar um, battle, and and when you put it like that. Of course, everyone wants to be on team tree. You know, who doesn't love trees? But I feel like that's really an oversimplification. And like, yes, the fall cankerworm caterpillars, they feed on leaves, sure. So they're herbivores, like the vast majority of insects. But they've co-evolved with these trees for, millions of years. So the trees, they can take some herbivory and bounce back. Like they can take some defoliation and just turn around and refoliate afterwards. So like, and yes, like there are some tree deaths that are attributed to fall cankerworm herbivory, but that tends to happen in times when, like, say you've got urban trees that are already stressed out from other factors, like, they're not getting enough water, or it's too hot, or, they're sickly for other reasons. So, in that case, the herbivory could be the straw that broke the camel's back. But um, I still I still think the fall cankerworm gets a bad rap, including the fact that its common name is fall cankerworm. It does sound terrible. It doesn't sound like something you want to save, but just think of them as little green inchworms. They're kind of cute to watch inching along, and sometimes you'll see them like on a single strand of silk, like hanging from the trees in the spring. Like I've walked into them, and it doesn't bother me because I think they're cute, but they certainly have their enemies as well as their fan club.
Yeah. And I mean, this kind of brings us back around to your research with bluebirds, and also really expanding it out to a lot of other bird species, because I mean, there are birds that come through that those little inchworm caterpillars um, to group a whole bunch of different species and even genera in some cases together here. I know some of the strict entomologists that might be listening might be rolling their eyes now, but yeah, just generally grouping them all together as those inchworm type caterpillars. Those are so important to many different species of birds. I mean, whether it's as adults, like with the cuckoos,
Mm-hmm.
or like with your research showed with the caterpillars being so important for the nestlings. And that's also what the chickadee research with what Desiree was doing
Mm-hmm.
found as well.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's a study that I think at this point in time, a lot of people who are interested in birds have heard about, um, because it
Mm-hmm.
is several years old now. But yeah, and I use it a lot and my talks and stuff and referencing it. And this is going to be another one that I'll be talking about a lot too and referencing, because you find that bluebirds use those so often. And it's such a huge
Mm-hmm.
component of the nestling's diet.
And the reason it's a big deal, it's not just, like they're eating a lot of caterpillars. It's um, caterpillars we already knew going into this, they tend to be, very specialized herbivores. I mean, and that's yeah, they're on a spectrum. So there's some that are generalists and they're happy eating all kinds of leaves. um, but most of them, the majority of caterpillars are going to be host plant specialists. So they might be super specialized where there's just one plant that they depend on, or it might be one family of plants. So we say a specialist depends on one lineage of plants. So it might be like, a group of closely related plants. But in any case, when you have plants that disappear from the landscape, you're going to have a whole, you know, there's going to be a bunch of caterpillars that are going to go hungry because they can't just suddenly adapt their diet and start feeding on some totally different plant. It took them a long time to evolve the adaptations they need to overcome their host plant's innate defenses. And so,
Yeah.
uh, you know, that's why I know your listeners know, but native plants are so important.
Right. And that's something that I think that's something that a lot of people don't realize, is that it's kind of that specialization and how that actually works, because it's like, oh, there's leaves out, it eats leaves. There's leaves outside. All leaves are the same. And it's
Hmm.
not. I mean, they
Right.
are, it's just like us eating our vegetables. Different fruits and vegetables have different nutrients in them. They have different chemical properties, is what it comes down to with it.
Hmm.
And plants, they don't, having their vegetation eaten may not be exactly the best thing for them. It's kind of like us getting a mosquito bite. We don't actually like it. And so they've developed their own kind of internal um, insect repellents, I guess is one way to put it. That just the chemicals that they've developed to defend themselves, um,
Right.
that sort of act as pesticides. So when something, take the monarch caterpillars, with those, a lot of things can't eat the milkweeds because of
Mm-hmm.
the cardiac glycosides that are in there.
Exactly.
But the monarch
Yeah.
caterpillar has specialized on it, so
Mm-hmm.
it can work with that and get around it, but um, in doing so, it's lost the ability to eat other and digest other things.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
so it becomes really specialized. And this kind of happens to one degree or another, like you were talking, and lots of different, many of our different caterpillars.
Yeah, and I love monarchs because, by this point I feel like most people are familiar with them and they know about that important, how interwoven they are with milkweed. And then I can tell people like, that's the famous example you've heard of, but that's not the exception. That's really the
Mhm.
rule. Like there's so many specialists like that that have their particular plant. So, planting milkweed is a great first step if you want to support Lepidoptera, but also plant some goldenrod and of course plant your white oaks if you've got the space for it. So, and one of the best resources that I'm familiar with, just because it's just so user friendly, the National Wildlife Federation has their Native Plant Finder webpage.
Mhm.
So, and you just like plug in your zip code and it populates a list of plants for your area. And it shows you there's like a little butterfly icon and it will have a number next to it. And that tells you like how many, I don't know if it's Lepidoptera specifically or if it's insect species more broadly, but it will tell you, how many species depend on that plant or how many species you'll be supporting when you plant that. And it's, probably um, woefully incomplete just for lack of people to do the legwork to figure out like exactly what insects are feeding on all these different plant species. But it's a really great starting point. And yeah, and you can filter it by trees versus shrubs. So you can kind of adapt it for how much space you're working with. So just really user friendly. I always plug that when I'm talking to a new audience.
Yes, that is a great online resource. And there's some books and stuff, Gardening for Moths. I mean, most of what is a
Yes.
wonderful book. That is an amazing book. And we did a
Mm-hmm.
podcast episode last year with the author
Yes.
of that book.
I listened to that one. It was fantastic.
But yeah, I mean, so all these little green inchworm type caterpillars are moths. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so that's primarily what these birds are eating. And so they're not eating the monarchs, the caterpillar, the monarch caterpillars,
Yeah, not so much.
because that's something else that I get a lot of times is, oh, but I don't want all my butterflies to get eaten. Most of the caterpillars that are getting eaten aren't butterflies. But
Mm-hmm.
um, yeah, just having all these native plants and the diversity of native plants is really helpful for supporting those caterpillars that are then
Mm-hmm.
going to support, name your um, favorite bird for the most part. We
Right.
have
Yeah.
all the species that have been studied, or pretty much all the species that have been studied. Um, Chickadees, bluebirds, so, some of the others, like I said, the cuckoos are almost solely caterpillar eaters. Um,
Mm-hmm.
there's always this high percentage of caterpillars. So we can't say every species because research hasn't been done on every species, but you're helping a lot of species, or not every species of bird.
Mm-hmm.
And
And don't forget the warblers, because birders love their warblers,
oh, yes.
and that's another group that is highly dependent on caterpillars, at least during the breeding season. It's interesting. Even there's a lot of birds that we don't realize how much they depend on caterpillars. Like we don't think about them eating caterpillars because maybe as adults they're happy to feed on seeds and nuts and berries, and the species you see at your bird feeder. But when they're rearing their young, like during that part of the life cycle, that is when caterpillars and insect protein becomes so important because to develop quickly and to be healthy, they need the kind of energy that you can get from insects, not from seeds and nuts.
And so, yeah, that's why when like the common yellow throats, if you see them which is one of the little warblers. This little yellow warbler has his Zorro mask on.
Mhm.
And yeah, you see it sometimes hopping up and down the tall grass or the tall ironweed, especially like the ironweed and the
Mhm.
goldenrods and stuff like that. They're hunting for caterpillars.
Moths help make the natural world go round by providing food for a wide variety of animals and by providing important but often overlooked pollination services for a wide variety of native plants. Not to mention, many moths are absolutely gorgeous and worth attracting just so you can enjoy watching them in the same way we enjoy attracting and watching butterflies. So if you want to attract and support moths, then I highly recommend the book Gardening for Moths, A Regional Guide. This book has absolutely gorgeous photographs and is divided into 3 sections. The first section provides an overview of moths and their importance in the ecosystem. The second section highlights approximately 140 species of plants and the types of moths those plants attract. That way you can see what types of moths might be attracted to the native plants you already have growing. The third section contains species profiles of around 150 species of moths, including their host plants. So if there's a certain species of moth you want to attract, you will know what to plant in order to support its caterpillars. I'll have a link in the description if you are interested in purchasing this book.
I had another project that I did during grad school that I unfortunately have not published yet, but maybe someday. Um, but I was basically crowdsourcing images of birds eating insects just from the public. So yeah, I posted in social media groups for birders or for nature lovers or gardeners, whatever. Um, and got thousands of photos from across North America. That was I was focusing on North America and hundreds of different bird species and so I only did the really deep dive on eastern bluebirds with my trail camera or with my not trail cameras with my GoPro cameras, but I got at least like a sampling of what all these other bird families are eating. And caterpillars were the dominant arthropod group in 16 of the 20 bird families that we looked at. And in some groups, so I think I said for bluebirds it was about 40% of the diet. In some groups it was up to like 70% of the diet. So, and the pictures are skewed towards the breeding season because that's when a photographer is most likely to be able to snap a photo of a bird with insect prey because it's taking it somewhere. It's taking it back to the nest. Whereas, if they're just foraging for themselves, they're just gonna, gobble it right up, and you may or may not get a picture of it. But and what was really cool was a lot of the pictures we got from the public were also eastern bluebird um, as the subject, and so I was able to look at, did the community scientists who are just snapping these photos all over the eastern bluebird's range, like did what they photograph match what I saw with my camera traps in Delaware? And they did match really closely. In both sets of photos, it was like Lepidoptera was the most important group, followed by Orthoptera, followed by spiders, followed by beetles. So those 4 groups in the same order of importance. So what that showed was the community science methodology really works. Like if you get enough photos, and I want to say from the public we had between 500 and 600 photos of eastern bluebirds that were submitted, which is more than we got for any other single species. I think because eastern bluebirds are so popular. Um, yeah, if you get a big enough sample size, you will capture, what they're eating. Because yeah, I was thinking like a human photographer might be, there might be layers of bias there that you can't control. Like, they're not going to be capturing every every feeding event. They might be biased towards larger prey or more colorful prey or certain times of day or what have you. But just the fact that what they captured with their cameras matched what my camera traps caught in Delaware, like they matched so closely, and I thought that was really
Yeah,
incredible.
when they match that closely, you got pretty solid results
Yeah.
there from both different methods. And it just, again, goes to show how important when we talk about the application, growing native
Mm-hmm.
plants, just that one simple thing
Mm-hmm.
is, because that's going to support so many different,
So many
yeah,
birds.
it's going to support the insects, whether it's
Mm-hmm.
caterpillars or other insects. It's going to support the birds that eat. It's going to support, I mean, it just
Mm-hmm.
keeps rippling up and out um, throughout the
Mm-hmm.
food web that it really is the base. Native plants are the basis. And then you go up
Yep.
one little step, and then you're into the insects, which
hmm
caterpillars are a big part of that.
And as an entomologist, I've always loved insects, but it's been really eye-opening for me to see, to the average person, I think birds are a much bigger draw than insects are. So, um, I could have shouted from the rooftops all day to like, plant native to save the insects and maybe not gotten much traction with it, but when you're talking about save the birds, like, all of a sudden you've got people much more invested because yeah, birds they're big and they're charismatic and they're beautiful and they, they're fascinating. And of course, I mean, I think insects are most of those things too. They're not big, but but yeah, it's just being able to think about the whole food web. Um, it's what's really going to bring more people on board.
Exactly. And the fact that I love the fact too that there's so many different entry points. So I know lots of people
Right.
that were, oh, bird. And I mean, I'll admit, I like the birds a lot more too than the insects when I first got started. And then because of the birds, I started paying attention to the insects. And that's, ooh,
hmm
insects. And they're easier to take pictures of because they don't fly away as fast. Um,
Right.
so yeah, I mean, it's kind of like, and so yeah, there's lots of different angles to come into it at. And
hmm
everybody can come into it in their own way.
Yeah, I think like the takeaway from my Bluebird project, which is, again, just really hammering home the importance of native insects. I I think it's honestly kind of this might seem like a weird word choice, but hear me out. I think it's really empowering because, like I'm sure many of your listeners, I care a lot about nature and wild things, and I feel overwhelmed sometimes thinking about like the big environmental problems. I worry about climate change and biodiversity loss and habitat destruction, and it can all feel like really dark and really daunting, and like, what can I do about it? But then it's like, oh, here's one very simple, very actionable thing you can do. Just go out and plant a native plant, and you've done something that's meaningful. And you can scale it to whatever level you're able to do. Like, if you have a big yard, great, make a big wildlife habitat. If you, um, if you need to start small, I mean, just, it can be as simple as like taking one invasive plant out and replacing it with one native. And when I did this project, I was a student, so I was still like, renting property. I wasn't really allowed to mess with the yard too much. So I had to find other, outlets. But, there's so many parks out there that would love to have volunteers to help with their plantings. I also got involved just in the state legislature. I helped to, I took part, and actually Doug Tallamy was a member of the same task force. We actually helped to pass legislation that banned the sale of some of the worst offenders when it comes to invasive plants that were still, commercially available in the landscape and nursery industry. So that, that's another tack you can take if you want to, delve into local or state politics. Um, so, there's lots of, very actionable things you can do. So it's like, no, as one person, I'm not gonna solve climate change, but I, but I can make, a nice little micro habitat for some Lepidoptera
Mhm.
in my little corner of the earth, and hopefully feed some hungry birds.
Yes. And that's, I mean, I completely get where you're coming from because that's exactly why we started doing backyard ecology was to be able to two things help people see what's out there because you got to see and notice it and it's so
hmm
easy just to walk by, but then
hmm
also to help empower the people, like you said, give them the way to make a difference in their
hmm
yards, in their communities, in the places that we spend all of our time at,
hmm
because you're right, it is overwhelming. And it is,
hmm
you could get so caught up in the gloom and doom of all the big things that we can't have direct impacts on.
Very easily.
And this is something that we can
Yeah.
easily do is grow more native plants, bring more native plants into the conversations. And the other really great thing about the native plants, coming from somebody who is way too busy and who lives in a society where everybody is way too busy, I know that.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to do one more thing. You plant the native plants, you grow the native plants, and that helps
Mm-hmm.
so much. It's it's like the kind of you do this and you manage it for the
Mm-hmm.
habitat and stuff. And you're helping so many different things. It's not like you have to do this for the caterpillars and this for the birds and this for the rabbits and this for the turtles. It kind of all goes
Mm-hmm.
together.
Yeah, it's so simple in a way.
And with the bluebirds, like you said, it's empowering being able to plant those native plants, knowing that that really makes a huge difference. It also helps too because not everybody can put out a bluebird house for whatever reason.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we tend to get blinders on sometimes and just focus, okay, I put out a bluebird house. Everything's wonderful. But they got to be able to eat.
Mm-hmm.
And you're not going to have bluebirds nesting right on top of each other. So even if you can't, for whatever reason, have a bluebird house, you can still do some of these other things which could feed the bluebirds that are nesting on a
Mm-hmm.
neighbor's or a neighbor down the road's place.
Or even just stopping by during a, migration.
Do you dream of having a beautiful backyard full of all kinds of birds, butterflies, bees, fireflies, and all kinds of other cool critters, but you aren't quite sure how to make that dream come true? Do you know that native plants are important, but have questions about how to grow them or even which ones you should grow? Would you like to bounce ideas off Shannon and I? Ask us questions, and just geek out about nature with us? If so, then I invite you to join us in the Backyard Ecology community. This is an online membership experience where you get direct access to Shannon and I, as well as the other community members from all across the eastern U.S. who are trying to do similar things in their yards. We have 2 virtual meetings every month where you can get detailed answers to your questions, celebrate your wins, and just geek out about native plants, pollinators, and wildlife. We also have a private online discussion space where we can continue those conversations and provide additional support between meetings. Which means if you've been wondering something like, I wonder if right now is a good time to dig that plant up and move it, then all you have to do is post a question and we'll be able to tell you, yeah, this is the perfect time to do that. Or, no, if you can wait, you'd be better off to wait. Or if you can't wait, here's what you do so that you give the plant the best chance of surviving. I'll provide a link in the description if you want to learn more, and hopefully you will come join us.
Do you have any other applications that we might want to think about for your research and helping bluebirds or other birds?
Yeah, this is probably a concept you're already well familiar with, but I try and challenge people to kind of like reprogram their brains to not think of insects as the bad guys when they see them feeding on their beloved plants. Um, and I can't take credit for this because I saw it online and I wish I remembered, who had originally posted it, but it was kind of this jokey post that said, here's the 10-step program to assessing insect herbivory in your yard. And it wasn't literally a 10-step program. It was like, do you see insects feeding on your plant? Okay, like take 10 steps back, 10 steps away from the plant, and like, can you still see it? Can you see the damage? And usually from that distance, you can't, or it's, so insignificant. It's like, okay, then you don't need to do anything. Like your plant is gonna be just fine. So, they're tougher than we give them credit for. Like they've co-evolved with these insect herbivores, and just because you see them feeding and, leaving big holes or, little tunnels through the leaves, it's doesn't mean you have to reach for a can of spray to get rid of them.
No. And yeah, I love that. And I hadn't heard it put that way exactly, but I like oftentimes will ask people who goes through the woods and says, "Ooh, yuck, all these leaves are eaten." Or walks out in the field and go, "Oh, yuck, there's so many there's so many but so much tree
Yeah,
damage
it's
here."
still a beautiful forest or a beautiful meadow
Exactly. You
or
just
what
don't
have
see
you.
it. It's the same sort of thing.
Yeah.
And going back to what you were saying about just how resilient the plants are. Um,
Hmm.
I've run a small, very small backyard nursery, native plant nursery before. And I would have trays of like great blue lobelia or cardinal flower. And they'd be growing and they'd get up to a certain height. And this would happen a lot of times with like my purple cone flowers as well. They get up to a certain height and then they get totally defoliated, like absolutely
Hmm.
eaten to the ground by caterpillars. And
Mm-hmm.
then I start seeing the birds all coming through, especially like the with the lobelias, because they were like little green inchwormy type things that were eating them.
Mm-hmm.
And the birds would just come in and absolutely go crazy. I mean, I'd see Carolina Wrens going through,
Mm-hmm.
and they just come through and have the biggest green
Right.
gobs of caterpillars.
Uh-huh.
And they'd be going back to their nest, and then they'd come back and go back through again. And within 2, 3 weeks, you couldn't even tell that those plants that had like been completely defoliated had ever been touched
Mm-hmm.
because they'd already come back that much.
That's great.
So yeah, we get overly concerned sometimes about it, I
Yeah.
think. And we freak out, which is understandable too, because we, especially if you've been trying to baby and take care of these little plants, and then all of a sudden you see them all gone. See the leaves like totally eaten. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, there's a reason, especially when we're talking native plants and native insects on them. Like you said at the beginning,
Mm-hmm.
um, they've all co-evolved together. It actually works out pretty well in the end if we just let the system
Mm-hmm.
work.
Exactly.
So thanks a lot for doing this research and for coming in and presenting it and doing something that shows us how we can actually apply it too, because that's important.
Well, it was my pleasure. I love the podcast and I'm honored to be featured.
Thanks so much and have a great day. And if you would like to learn how one of our backyard ecology community members turned their small suburban yard into a haven for birds, then check out this video. And until next time, don't forget to take some time to enjoy the nature in your yard and community.